Hi everyone, Danny here. Today I'll be talking about the physiological determinants of endurance sports performance. I'll only be touching about on variables that can be changed without complex intervention so that it will be relevant to the general population. All right. Endurance sports are activities that require individuals to work at sub-maximal intensity for prolonged duration. Some examples are marathon, triathlon, and road cycling. Some of the factors that determines how well individuals will perform in endurance sports are maximum oxygen consumption, also known as VO2 max, lactate threshold, and movement economy. So what is VO2 max all about? Before we get to VO2 max, let's first take a look at the energy system. Our body relies on three energy systems to generate energy. First is the anaerobic alactic system. This system can produce energy almost instantly, so it predominates during activities that require short bursts of maximum explosive effort, such as jumping and sprinting. It does not require oxygen, but because it relies on phosphocreatine as fuel source, this system cannot sustain energy production for long, as there's a limit to the amount of phosphocreatine stored in the muscles. Next is the anaerobic glycolytic system. This system uses carbohydrate stores in the muscles as fuel and also does not require oxygen. It can also produce energy relatively fast. It predominates during sustained high-intensity activities like a 400-meter sprint. The drawback of this system is that production of lactic acid. Hence, activities that rely heavily on this system is extremely fatiguing. Finally is the aerobic system. This system relies on fat stores as fuel and requires oxygen to help with energy production. Therefore, energy production is relatively slower than the other two systems. This system predominates during submaximal activities such as endurance sports. VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen our body can consume. As participating in endurance sports rely mostly on the aerobic system to produce energy, the more oxygen the body is able to consume, the higher amount of energy the body is able to produce using the aerobic system. VO2 max is expressed as either liter of oxygen consumed per minute or liters of oxygen consumed per kilogram body mass per minute. If you are in weight-supported sports like kayaking and rowing, the absolute value will be more relevant. But if you are in weight-bearing sports like running, then you have to take your body weight into account. Here's the typical VO2 max of elite endurance athletes and the average human. Because the elite have such high VO2 max, they can continue tapping on the aerobic system when working at much higher intensity level and minimize the contribution from anaerobic system, which can lead to higher fatigue. VO2 max is dependent on stroke volume. which is the amount of blood that is being pumped every time the heart contracts. With greater stroke volume, blood can be transported to working muscles and deliver oxygen quicker. Oxygen is bound to red blood cell, so with higher concentration of red blood cell, there will be higher concentration of oxygen in the blood. Mitochondria are organelles in the muscles that are responsible for the aerobic metabolism. You can think of it as the powerhouse. So the more mitochondria there is, the quicker energy can be produced through the aerobic metabolism. Aerobic enzymes are required for the chemical reaction to take place, so higher concentration of the enzymes can speed up the aerobic metabolism. These factors will improve by performing endurance training. VO2 max might sound like a very important determinant for endurance performance, but in reality, at the elite level, where pretty much everyone has high VO2 max, the next two factors will be better indicators of who will win the race. We shall now take a look at lactic threshold. Lactic acid is produced when exercise intensity increases. This is because we start increasing the use of anaerobic glycolytic system to produce energy. When lactic acid is formed, it dissociates into lactate and hydrogen ion. Lactate will then be converted back to glucose to be used as fuel. Hydrogen ion is the molecule that causes fatigue. It will be buffered by buffers such as bicarbonate and phosphate that are present in the body. This is one reason why some athletes load up on bicarbonate before a race, because they want to make sure that there's higher concentration of bicarbonate to buffer away the hydrogen ions that will cause higher rate of fatigue. Lactate threshold is the point at which lactate begins to accumulate in the body. It's easier to measure lactic concentration than concentration of hydrogen ions, hence the term lactate threshold. So lactate threshold is expressed as a percentage of VO2 max. So if a person's VO2 max speed is 20 km per hour, and it was found that the lactic threshold is 80% of the VO2 max, then the lactic threshold speed will be at 16 km per hour. Typically, the elite endurance athlete will have lactic threshold at more than 75% of the VO2 max. The average human will be somewhere around 50 to 60% of the VO2 max. So if you look at two elite runners with the same VO2 max of maybe 80, and one of them has a lactic threshold of 80%, while the other one has a lactic threshold of 75%, then the one with a lactic threshold of 80% will probably be the one who wins the race, because he will be able to sustain a higher intensity as compared to the other runner. So next, we shall take a look at movement economy. Movement economy is basically the energy cost of performing a specific movement or activity. It can be expressed as kilocalories per kilogram body mass per minute or per distance, kilometers or so on. Right? Factors affecting movement economy includes technique proficiency, muscular strength, as well as equipment. Examples of equipment. Recently, we would have heard about how the Nike shoes can actually help to improve running economy. So, and we know that certain bicycles are more aerodynamic than others. So, having good equipment can actually help with movement economy as well. Here are the factors affecting movement economy that individuals can train to improve. Firstly, if the technique of the movement is proficient, there will be less redundant movement and more efficient recruitment of muscle fibers. This will reduce the energy cost of a specific movement. Secondly, if the muscles responsible for the movement are stronger, less energy will be required to sustain a given amount of force. It will also delay the recruitment of fast twitch fibers as it will take longer for the slow twitch muscles to get fatigued. Stronger muscles and tendon are also stiffer. This means that the tendon has greater ability to use the stored elastic energy during muscle contraction to help with force production. Therefore, less energy will be required to actively produce the required force. By Now that we know about the determinants of endurance performance, let's take a look at how we can train them. First, we can try to determine our maximum aerobic speed or power depending on the mode of exercise we are looking at. Maximum aerobic speed or power is one of the best predictors of endurance performance. It is influenced by the three determinants of endurance performance. Here we have the RAM test protocol for runners to determine their maximum aerobic speed. First, we always want to set the treadmill to a 1% gradient so that we can reflect the energy cost of running on road. With all, same for all activity, we should always have a proper warm-up. So warm up at a comfortable pace for 5 to 10 minutes, rest for a minute or so before we start the actual test. So the test can be, to start off, depending on your own fitness level, can start at either 8, 9, or even 10 km per hour. And then just increase the speed by 1 km per hour after every minute. And the final running speed that you can sustain for the full 1 minute will be considered your maximum aerobic speed. So that's for running. This is a RAM test protocol for cycling to determine the maximum aerobic power. So same thing, we want to have a proper warm-up before we start the actual test. rest for a minute, and then you can either start off at cycling at 150 watts or 200 watts. And after every minute, you increase by 25 watts. Same thing, the final power output sustained for the full 1 minute will be considered the maximum aerobic power. Do take note that these are maximum tests, so do make sure that you are accompanied by qualified exercise professionals if you are going to perform these tests. That's for safety reasons. So now that we know our maximum aerobic speed or power, we can use that to plan our training. I'll only be providing a general guide. You will have to consult a qualified coach if you want an individualized program. The general recommendation is to perform low to moderate intensity long distance training for 80% of the training program. And high intensity intervals should make up about only 20% of the training volume. The long distance training is typically performed at 60 to 70% of maximum aerobic speed or power for 30 to 90 minutes. High intensity intervals are usually performed at 90 to 120% of maximum aerobic speed or power. Do note that this 80-20% recommendation is for pure endurance athletes and not for the purpose of training endurance for athletes of other sports, as the physiological requirement for other sports is very different from that required by the pure endurance athletes. Here are some examples of high-intensity interval training you can include in your training program. Intervals are effective in improving the VO2 max and lactate threshold, but long-distance running will help with running economy. So even if you have a very high VO2 max, but your running economy is low, you might not be able to sustain a high intensity or high speed or high power output for a very long duration of time. So ultimately, you still have to perform a lot of long distance running to help with your running economy. Right? We've come to the end of today's presentation. I did not talk about strength training as it is a topic on its own. This will be covered on some other days. If you have any questions, you can drop me a message on my Twitter account. I hope you have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.